Rich Cowboy pretends to sleep to test his shy maid. But what she does leaves him frozen. The sun had just begun to dip behind the rolling hills of Texas, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The warm light stretched across the vast Whitman Ranch, where the quiet rhythm of life moved slowly but steadily. This ranch was more than a piece of land. It was a legacy, a lifetime of hard work and careful management. And at the center of it all was Jacob Whitman, a man whose reputation as a successful rancher was known throughout the nearby towns. He was tall, with broad shoulders, hands that told the story of years spent working with cattle and horses, and eyes that missed nothing. People often found him distant at first, but those who truly knew him understood that he cared deeply about the land and the people who worked on it. Recently, a new face had appeared on the ranch, a young maid named Ella. She was quiet, soft-spoken, and moved with a careful grace that immediately drew attention. Not because she tried to stand out, but because there was something about her calm, gentle manner that made people notice her without realizing it. Jacob had watched her from a distance when she first arrived, noting how she carefully organized the kitchen, handled the household chores, and treated the older staff with genuine respect. Jacob had always been curious about people's true nature. He had learned early in life that titles, money, or appearances rarely told the whole story. He believed that true character came out in small, unnoticed actions, the way someone acted when they thought no one was watching. And Ella, with her shy demeanor, had sparked a particular interest in him. One late afternoon, as the ranch settled into its usual quiet, Jacob decided to put his curiosity to the test. He planned a subtle experiment, something small but telling. He would pretend to sleep in the lounge while Ella went about her chores. He wanted to see if she would act out of habit, fear, or genuine kindness. It was not a test to trick her, but a way to understand her character, a way to observe the real Ella beneath the polite and shy exterior she wore around everyone else. Jacob chose the lounge for his little experiment. The room was large and comfortable, with soft leather chairs, a fireplace that crackled gently even in the warm weather, and wide windows that looked out over the rolling pastures. The golden light of the setting sun filled the space, casting long shadows that danced across the wooden floor. Jacob reclined in one of the chairs, placing a soft blanket over himself and closing his eyes. He positioned himself carefully, so it looked like he had dozed off after a long day of work. Meanwhile, Ella was in the kitchen, putting away freshly washed dishes. Her hands moved with careful precision, arranging plates and cups in their proper places. She hummed softly to herself, a tune that seemed to float through the empty halls. She had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the Whitman Ranch, and though she was new, she took pride in her work. Every surface she cleaned, every item she polished was done with care. She liked to see things neat and orderly, and she believed that work done well was its own reward. As she moved from the kitchen to the lounge, she noticed the warm light of the setting sun spilling across the wooden floor. The room smelled faintly of leather and polished wood, and she could hear the soft rustle of papers on a nearby desk. Then she saw him, Jacob, reclined in the chair, eyes closed, a blanket draped over him. Her first instinct was to pause, unsure if he was resting, sleeping, or simply lost in thought. She hesitated at the doorway, glancing at the tray she had been carrying. Ella had always been careful not to disturb anyone while they were resting. She stepped lightly, making sure her shoes made no sound against the wooden floor. She carried the tray with freshly baked bread, a small loaf she had made that afternoon. The smell of warm dough mixed with the lingering aroma of the ranch kitchen, filling the room with a comforting scent. Jacob observed her carefully from behind his closed eyelids. He noted the way her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the tray, the way her eyes flicked toward him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. He could see the hesitation in her movements, the small pauses as she considered every action. This was exactly what he had hoped to observe, the careful attention to detail, the thoughtfulness that came naturally rather than as a performance. Ella placed the tray on the small table beside him. She made sure it was balanced, adjusting the position until it was steady. Then she noticed something. A small ribbon of fabric had come loose from Jacob's coat. It hung there gently, brushing against the leather of the chair. She paused, unsure whether she should fix it or leave it alone. In that moment, she made a choice that surprised even her. She gently tucked the ribbon back into place, smoothing it down with careful fingers. "There," she whispered softly, as if speaking to herself rather than to anyone else. Jacob felt a quiet admiration stir within him. He had expected obedience or caution, perhaps even fear, but not this. Ella's actions were not about following orders or seeking approval. They were about noticing what needed to be done and doing it, quietly, thoughtfully, and with care. As she moved to tidy the rest of the room, Jacob continued to watch, fascinated. She straightened the cushions on the chairs, dusted the surfaces with careful strokes, and even adjusted the curtains slightly to let the fading sunlight fill the room evenly. Every movement was deliberate but gentle, a reflection of a mind that valued order, care, and consideration for others. Even the smallest details caught his attention. Ella noticed the slight draft coming through a cracked window. She walked over quietly, closed the window, and then checked to see if Jacob was comfortable. Without waking him, she draped a soft blanket over the chair, making sure he would not feel the chill as the evening air settled in. Jacob felt himself frozen in admiration. He had never expected such thoughtful actions from someone so shy and quiet. It was one thing to follow instructions, but another to act out of genuine care without expecting recognition. In that moment, he realized that Ella's quiet demeanor was not a sign of weakness or timidity. It was a reflection of a gentle, kind, and observant heart. For the rest of the evening, Jacob remained in his chair, pretending to sleep but watching carefully as Ella continued her work. She moved from room to room, adjusting chairs, dusting surfaces, and making sure everything was in its proper place. She worked in silence, but her actions spoke volumes about her character. She did not rush, she did not complain, and she did not seek attention. Every gesture was thoughtful, every movement intentional. As the sun finally disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep purples and blues, Jacob knew he had learned something important. He had learned that true character could not be measured by words alone. It could not be measured by appearances or social standing. It was revealed in the quiet moments, in the small acts of kindness, in the thoughtful gestures made without expectation. Ella, unaware of the impact she had on Jacob, finished her chores and paused to look around the lounge one last time. She adjusted the blanket over him, straightened the tray of bread, and then quietly left the room, closing the door gently behind her. Jacob stayed in the chair for a few more moments, allowing himself to absorb what he had seen. That night, as the ranch settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Jacob felt a new sense of respect for the young maid. He had set out to observe her character, but in the process, he had discovered something more. A reminder that kindness, thoughtfulness, and genuine care were qualities that could not be taught, only lived. And in Ella, he had found those qualities in abundance, hidden beneath her shy exterior, waiting to be noticed by someone who truly cared to look. From that evening on, Jacob began to see Ella differently. He no longer viewed her simply as a maid performing her duties. He saw her as a person of depth, thoughtfulness, and integrity, someone whose quiet strength spoke louder than any words ever could. And while he did not immediately reveal that he had been watching her, he carried the knowledge in his heart, a quiet admiration that would grow with each passing day on the Whitman Ranch. The evening settled over the Whitman Ranch with a calm that only the countryside could offer. The sky had darkened to deep shades of blue and purple, and the first stars began to twinkle faintly above the hills. Inside the ranch house, the lounge was quiet, filled only with the soft flicker of the fireplace and the gentle creaking of the wooden floor as it cooled from the day's warmth. Jacob Whitman remained in the chair, still feigning sleep, though the firelight revealed the alertness in his eyes. He wanted to observe more, to see if Ella's kind and careful nature extended beyond the small acts he had already witnessed. Ella, unaware that Jacob was watching, moved carefully through the hallways of the ranch house. She carried with her a small basket of freshly laundered linens. The smell of warm, clean fabric filled the air as she walked. She paused briefly in front of each room, ensuring that everything was orderly. Even the smallest details mattered to her. She straightened a slightly crooked picture frame in the hallway, smoothed a wrinkled throw on one of the chairs, and lightly dusted the surfaces that were often overlooked. Jacob's eyes followed her every movement, though he kept his own breathing steady to maintain the illusion of sleep. What struck him most was not only the precision of her actions, but the thoughtfulness behind them. Ella did not move quickly to finish her tasks. Instead, she paused often, looking around the room as if she wanted to ensure everything was just right. It was not a rush to impress or a task done for reward. It was an attention to detail that spoke of pride in her work and care for the people who lived there. As she approached the lounge again, Jacob noticed a small spill on the side table, a faint streak of water where the glass had been. Most people might ignore it, assuming it was minor. But Ella knelt carefully, took a soft cloth from her basket, and wiped the table clean. Her movements were gentle, almost reverent, as though the act itself was a small gesture of respect. She did not glance at Jacob to see if he noticed. She simply completed the task quietly, leaving the room just as she had found it. Jacob felt a mix of surprise and admiration. Many had worked in his home before, but few had shown such careful consideration in every action. It was one thing to follow instructions. It was another to act with thoughtfulness, to see what was needed without being asked. He realized that Ella's quietness was not shyness in the ordinary sense. It was a reflection of someone who observed carefully, thought deeply, and acted with care. Then, something small happened that made Jacob's interest sharpen further. Ella noticed the slight draft coming through a partially open window. The evening air was cool, and she paused to check the temperature in the room. She glanced at Jacob and then back at the window, hesitating for a moment as if considering whether she should disturb him. But after a quiet decision, she moved forward, closed the window, and adjusted the curtain to prevent any more cold air from creeping in. She did all of this without a single sound that might have woken him. Jacob could hardly believe the thoughtfulness of her actions. He had expected careful behavior, yes, but not such an instinctive attention to comfort. Every detail she noticed, every small adjustment she made, was done for the sake of kindness. He had read about people who acted thoughtfully in stories, but seeing it in real life, and seeing it from someone so young and timid, left him momentarily speechless. As Ella moved toward the kitchen to return the basket of linens, Jacob noticed something else. Her expression was calm but concentrated, her lips slightly parted as she worked. There was no hurry, no sign of nervousness beyond the natural care she took in moving quietly. She seemed absorbed in the work itself, in the act of making the house orderly and comfortable. Jacob realized that this simple dedication reflected a deeper part of her character, one that valued integrity, diligence, and compassion. The fire in the lounge flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls. Jacob adjusted slightly in his chair, careful not to reveal that he was awake. His curiosity was growing with each passing moment. He wanted to see how far Ella's natural kindness extended, whether it would continue even when the work seemed complete, when there was no one around to witness it. Ella returned to the lounge, noticing a small vase of flowers that had tilted during her earlier cleaning. She knelt carefully to straighten it, making sure it stood upright without disturbing the arrangement. She touched each petal lightly, smoothing them so the bouquet appeared as vibrant and welcoming as it had in the morning. She whispered softly to herself, almost like a quiet promise, "There, perfect!" Her voice was barely audible, but the care in her tone was unmistakable. Jacob's thoughts drifted as he watched her. He thought about the people he had encountered in his life, the workers, the friends, the acquaintances. Many were skilled, many were hardworking, but few had shown the instinctive, selfless consideration that Ella displayed. He realized that he was witnessing a rare combination: humility, thoughtfulness, and courage hidden behind a shy exterior. It was a combination that left him both impressed and deeply reflective. Minutes passed, yet Jacob remained in his chair, pretending to sleep. Ella moved again, this time toward the fireplace, where a small piece of ash had fallen onto the rug. Without hesitation, she picked it up carefully, placing it on the hearth, and smoothed the rug to remove any trace. Her movements were precise but gentle, showing patience that Jacob rarely saw in anyone. Then came a moment that truly surprised him. Ella noticed a loose thread on his coat, a detail so small that most people would not even notice it. She knelt carefully and adjusted the thread, tucking it neatly back into the seam. As she did so, she spoke softly, almost as if telling herself a secret. "Better this way." Jacob could feel a strange mixture of admiration and astonishment. Every small gesture she made carried meaning, and she acted with such thoughtfulness that it felt almost sacred. Jacob's mind wandered to the lessons he had learned growing up on the ranch. Life had taught him about hard work, responsibility, and perseverance. But it had rarely taught him about this kind of quiet, instinctive kindness. The kind that did not seek recognition, that acted simply because it was the right thing to do. Ella, in her shy and gentle manner, had demonstrated something that went far beyond the ordinary expectations of a maid or an employee. The evening deepened, and the ranch house grew quieter. The older staff had finished their day's work and retired to their rooms. Outside, the ranch settled into a peaceful stillness, with only the occasional sound of an animal in the distance or the wind brushing against the tall grass. Inside, Ella moved back to the kitchen, collecting a few leftover dishes to wash and return to their places. She hummed softly, a tune that seemed to harmonize with the gentle crackling of the fireplace. Jacob watched, still pretending to sleep, yet fully aware of every motion. He realized that this quiet observation was revealing more about Ella than he had expected. She was careful not because she feared consequences, but because she truly cared. Her quiet demeanor masked a strength of character, a strength that manifested not in loud words or bold actions, but in patience, observation, and thoughtful care. As she returned the clean dishes to their cupboards, she noticed a small cloth that had fallen behind the sink. Without hesitation, she bent down and retrieved it, folding it neatly before placing it back with the other linens. Jacob felt himself captivated by her instinctive sense of order, her natural inclination to notice and correct things that others might overlook. Then, as she prepared to leave the kitchen, Ella noticed a chair that had been slightly out of place. She moved it back to its proper spot and smoothed the seat, making sure the arrangement looked inviting. She did not pause to check if anyone was watching. Her actions were guided entirely by her own principles, a quiet insistence on doing what was right, on creating comfort and harmony in the space around her. Jacob felt a deep respect growing within him. He realized that he had never truly witnessed someone act with such consistent, gentle thoughtfulness. Ella's shyness, which might have seemed like timidity to others, was actually a reflection of her humility and conscientious nature. It was a rare quality, one that Jacob recognized as both admirable and precious. Finally, Ella returned to the lounge, carrying the basket of linens. She placed it gently on the side table and paused to glance at Jacob. Even though he was pretending to sleep, she instinctively made sure the blanket over him was properly tucked, the chair adjusted for comfort. She stepped back quietly, ensuring that everything was in its place before she left the room again. Jacob remained in the chair for a few more moments, absorbing what he had just witnessed. He had set out to observe her character, to see how she behaved when she thought no one was watching. What he had seen, however, was far beyond his expectations. Ella's actions reflected not only diligence but kindness, patience, and an almost intuitive understanding of how to care for others. That night, as he finally allowed himself to rise from the chair, Jacob felt a sense of admiration and humility. He had expected to learn something about her work ethic, but what he had truly discovered was a glimpse into the essence of her character. A quiet, thoughtful, and deeply caring nature that left a lasting impression on him. The night had settled fully over the Whitman ranch, and the air outside was cool and still. Inside the house, the soft glow of the fireplace created a cozy warmth, flickering against the walls and casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. Jacob Whitman remained seated in the lounge, pretending to sleep. His plan from earlier in the evening had been simple. Observe Ella, see how she behaved when she thought no one was watching. But as the hours passed, what he had witnessed exceeded anything he could have imagined. Ella moved quietly through the house once again, carrying a small stack of folded laundry. Her movements were slow and careful, but there was an ease in them now, a rhythm that came from familiarity with the space and comfort in her own diligence. She hummed softly as she went, the tune almost blending with the crackling of the fire. Jacob's eyes remained open just enough to watch her, hidden behind his closed eyelids. He had already seen her careful attention to detail, straightening cushions, closing windows, tucking a blanket over him. But now he wanted to see if her instinctive kindness extended beyond chores. Would she notice small things that others might consider insignificant? Would she act to make the space not just tidy, but welcoming and comfortable? As Ella entered the lounge, she noticed a small chair that had been slightly moved from its usual place. She bent down, carefully lifting it and setting it precisely where it belonged. Then almost instinctively, she smoothed the nearby rug to remove a slight crease. Her movements were deliberate and quiet, a kind of gentle choreography that seemed to fill the room with calm. Jacob's breath caught. The precision of her actions, combined with the softness and care in her movements, made him realize just how thoughtful she truly was. He thought back to the people who had worked on his ranch before. Many were skilled, efficient, and obedient. Some even worked long hours without complaint. But few, if any, had displayed the kind of awareness that Ella possessed, the ability to see what was needed, anticipate it, and act without being prompted. He realized that he had been so focused on results and efficiency that he had often overlooked the quiet acts of kindness that truly made life better for everyone around. Ella moved toward a small table by the fireplace, noticing a single book that had been slightly out of place. Without hesitation, she picked it up and set it neatly in its proper spot on the shelf. Then, seeing a slight smudge on the polished wood, she took a soft cloth from her basket and wiped it clean. Each movement was gentle, respectful of the objects and the space, as though she understood that care for one's surroundings reflected care for the people who lived there. Jacob felt a strange mixture of admiration and surprise. He had expected to see obedience and carefulness. What he had not expected was the thoughtfulness behind every action, the quiet, instinctive kindness that seemed to guide her. He had heard people speak about individuals with good hearts and gentle natures, but he had rarely seen such qualities in action, especially displayed so naturally, so consistently. Then something happened that made him freeze in awe. Ella noticed that the fireplace was slightly tilted, the logs were not stacked evenly, and a small ember had fallen onto the hearth. Most people might have ignored it, assuming it was minor or fixed it without much thought. But Ella knelt carefully, rearranging the logs so the fire would burn evenly. She moved the fallen ember back to the hearth and adjusted the fireplace screen to protect the room from sparks. Her face was calm and focused, her hands precise and careful. Jacob felt his chest tighten. He had never expected such attention to the smallest details, not just because they mattered, but because she seemed to care about the comfort and safety of the people in the house. Even as a shy, quiet maid, she demonstrated a level of awareness and responsibility that was rare, almost extraordinary. Ella then noticed a small throw pillow on the floor near the sofa. She picked it up, fluffing it gently before placing it back in its proper position. Then she stepped back, examining the room with a critical but gentle eye. Everything seemed perfect to her, the chairs aligned, the rug smooth, the fire glowing evenly. She glanced toward Jacob, still pretending to sleep, and instinctively adjusted the blanket over him once more. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "There, that's better." It was not the words that caught Jacob's attention, but the act itself, a quiet, instinctive gesture of care, performed without expectation of thanks or recognition. In that moment, he realized that her kindness was not limited to chores. It extended to the people she served, even when they were unaware. He remembered a conversation he had once overheard in town about people who did the right thing when no one was looking. Jacob had always thought of it as a saying, a nice sentiment but not a reality. Now he saw it in front of him. Ella's actions were exactly that, small, thoughtful deeds performed out of genuine concern and awareness. As the night grew darker, Jacob continued to observe her. She moved back to the kitchen to wash a few remaining dishes from dinner. Her movements were deliberate, careful, and efficient. She did not rush. She did not complain. She simply performed her tasks with quiet dignity, humming softly to herself as if the house itself responded to her presence. Jacob felt a strange warmth in his chest, a deep respect that went beyond admiration. He realized that this was more than just an observation of a maid at work. He was witnessing the manifestation of a character so rare that it was almost breathtaking. Ella's quiet shyness masked a strength of heart and mind that revealed itself through her actions. She cared not because she had to, but because it was part of who she was. At one point, she paused in the hallway, noticing a faint draft under a door that led to one of the storage rooms. She quietly walked over and closed the door, checking to see if the air was warmer. She adjusted the rug in front of it to prevent the chill from spreading into the main living area. Jacob could hardly breathe as he watched. This was no longer just about tidying or maintaining the house. Every movement she made showed foresight, consideration, and empathy. He thought of the other staff on the ranch. They worked hard, but often their actions were purely functional, completing tasks to meet expectations or earn wages. Ella's actions, however, were different. They came from a place of sincerity, of instinctive care, of wanting to make things better simply because it was the right thing to do. Jacob's admiration grew with each passing moment. He remembered the time he had spent training ranch hands and employees, teaching them efficiency and responsibility. He had emphasized precision and diligence, but he had rarely considered the human element, the simple, natural acts of care that transformed ordinary work into something meaningful. Ella was showing him, silently and gently, what he had been missing. As the night deepened, Ella returned to the lounge, carrying a small candle to replace one that had burned low. She placed it on the side table and lit it carefully, making sure the flame was steady and the room was well lit without glare. Then she noticed the firewood stack beside the fireplace was slightly uneven. She adjusted the logs so they would burn evenly, giving attention even to something as small as the arrangement of wood. Jacob could no longer pretend to sleep without feeling overwhelmed by what he was seeing. Her care, thoughtfulness, and attention to detail were extraordinary. And then, as if to test her further, he made a small, deliberate movement, shifting slightly in the chair, just enough to see if she would notice. Ella glanced toward him and immediately adjusted the blanket over his shoulders. She did not hesitate. She did not ask questions. She simply acted instinctively with the same gentle care that had guided all her actions throughout the evening. Jacob felt himself frozen. Her shyness, her quietness, her humility, all of it masked a heart and mind that were extraordinarily aware, sensitive, and kind. It was a moment of revelation for Jacob. He had set out to observe her, to test her character in a small, harmless way. What he had discovered was far more than a maid performing her duties. He had witnessed a young woman whose kindness, awareness, and thoughtfulness were natural and instinctive, qualities that could not be taught or faked. She moved through the house not as someone serving out of obligation, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people and space around her. For the first time in many years, Jacob felt a sense of humility. He realized that wealth, status, and authority could not teach the kind of genuine care that Ella had demonstrated. Her actions were pure, unscripted, and selfless. She had given him a lesson in human character that he would not forget, a lesson in noticing the small things, acting with thoughtfulness, and caring for others without expectation. Finally, Ella returned to the kitchen to finish her last few tasks. She straightened the chairs, wiped the counters one final time, and collected the last dishes to put away. Jacob watched her from the lounge, still frozen in admiration, until she paused at the doorway. She glanced toward him one last time, ensuring that everything was in its place and that he was comfortable. Then, she quietly left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Jacob remained seated, absorbing the quiet after her departure. He had come to learn something about her character, but in truth, he had discovered much more. A reminder that true kindness, thoughtfulness, and empathy often appeared in the quietest, most unexpected ways. Ella, in her gentle, unassuming manner, had revealed a strength and depth that left him awestruck, and he knew that the memory of this night would stay with him forever. The quiet of the ranch house settled deep into the night. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the tall grass, and the faint sound of animals moving across the pasture reminded Jacob Whitman that the world outside the house was calm and alive. Inside, however, Jacob remained seated in the lounge, still wrapped in the warm blanket, though now his eyes were fully open. He no longer pretended to sleep. What he had witnessed throughout the evening, Ella's care, her thoughtfulness, her instinctive kindness, had left him completely astonished. For a long moment, he simply watched the empty lounge, remembering every detail of her actions. The way she had smoothed the rugs, adjusted the furniture, arranged the firewood, and ensured the fireplace was safe. The small, gentle gestures that he had once considered trivial now seemed extraordinary in their significance. Each act reflected a combination of attentiveness, empathy, and selfless care that Jacob had rarely seen in his life. He leaned back in his chair, trying to gather his thoughts. He had always considered himself a fair and respectful employer, attentive to the needs of his staff and protective of the ranch he had inherited from his family. But in all his years of managing people, he had rarely encountered someone whose natural actions demonstrated such quiet integrity and thoughtfulness. Ella had not done anything grand or dramatic. There were no speeches, no proclamations of loyalty or devotion. She had simply noticed what was needed and acted, instinctively, with care. Jacob realized that what he felt was a mix of admiration and humility. It was not just the fact that Ella had performed her duties with diligence. It was the way she had gone beyond mere duty, the instinctive gestures of kindness, the attention to small details, the awareness of comfort and well-being. It was almost as if she had a natural understanding of people's needs, even when they were unaware of her presence. He thought back to the moment when she had adjusted the blanket over him, whispering softly as though to ensure he was comfortable without disturbing him. That small, quiet gesture had struck him more profoundly than anything else that evening. In it, he had seen the essence of her character, humility, thoughtfulness, and a rare form of empathy that could not be taught. Jacob's mind wandered to the lessons life had taught him, lessons of responsibility, hard work, and diligence. These were qualities he valued greatly, but he now realized they were incomplete without the kind of quiet kindness and attentiveness that Ella had displayed. She had reminded him, silently and gently, that character was revealed not only in accomplishments, but also in the small, unnoticed acts of care. He finally rose from his chair and walked slowly through the lounge, letting the warmth of the fire brush against his face. He examined the room, taking note of every adjustment she had made. The perfectly aligned cushions, the smooth rugs, the arranged firewood, the candle that now flickered softly without glare. The space felt different than it had before, not just tidy, but alive with the presence of someone who cared deeply about the comfort and well-being of others. Jacob thought of Ella herself, quietly completing her chores with care and dignity. He wondered about her life before the ranch, the experiences that had shaped her into someone so attentive and thoughtful. She had arrived quietly, shy and reserved, yet in the course of a single evening, she had revealed a depth of character that left him speechless. Her shyness was not weakness. It was a reflection of a mind and heart attuned to the needs of others, guided by empathy rather than expectation. As he walked toward the doorway, Jacob realized he had been holding his breath during much of the evening. Each small gesture she had made had caught him off guard, leaving him both amazed and reflective. The quiet strength in her actions, the natural way she had moved through the house, made him reconsider everything he thought he knew about character. He had often believed that people revealed themselves through words or bold deeds, but Ella had shown him that true character often appeared in subtle, unassuming ways. Jacob heard a soft sound behind him, the faintest shuffle of footsteps on the wooden floor. He turned to see Ella standing in the doorway of the lounge, holding a small cloth she had forgotten to return to the kitchen. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a hint of surprise as she noticed him standing there. I thought you were sleeping, sir," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob smiled, a warm, gentle expression that made her hesitate for a moment. "I was," he replied, "but I've been watching you all evening." Ella froze, unsure of what to say. Her cheeks colored slightly, and she instinctively clasped the cloth in her hands. "Watching me?" she asked quietly, almost as if repeating the words to make sure she had heard them correctly. "Yes," Jacob said, taking a slow step toward her. "I wanted to see how you worked, how you acted when you thought no one was noticing." He paused, studying her carefully. "And I have to tell you, what I've seen has left me completely amazed." Ella blinked, her eyes widening slightly. She had expected some praise for her work, perhaps, but not this level of sincerity and admiration. She had never thought that her quiet attention to detail and instinctive care could have such an impact. Jacob continued, his voice calm and deliberate. "You have a way of noticing things that most people would overlook. The way you adjust the blankets, the furniture, the firewood, every small gesture shows a care and thoughtfulness that is rare. I've never seen anything like it." Ella looked down, unsure how to respond. She had always done her work quietly, without expectation of recognition. She did not think of her actions as remarkable. She simply acted because it was the right thing to do. Yet here was Jacob, speaking to her with a level of respect and admiration that left her momentarily speechless. I just wanted everything to be in order," she whispered, her voice soft. "I didn't mean I didn't know you were," she trailed off, uncertain how to explain. Jacob shook his head gently. "It's not about doing your job," he said. "It's about how you do it. You notice things, you care without being asked. You act with thoughtfulness and kindness even when no one is watching. That is something extraordinary, Ella, truly extraordinary." For a moment the room was quiet, filled only with the soft crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of the night outside. Ella's shyness seemed to melt slightly under the warmth of his words. She had never imagined that her quiet, careful actions could be recognized in such a way. Jacob stepped closer, his expression earnest. "I want you to know that I see you. I see the effort, the care, and the heart you put into everything you do. And I want you to understand that it matters more than you realize." Ella's eyes glistened slightly in the firelight. She had worked in silence, often thinking her actions were small or unnoticed. But now, for the first time, someone had truly seen her. Not just her work, but the thoughtfulness behind it. Jacob continued, his voice steady but filled with warmth. "It's easy to think that the small things don't matter, that only big gestures count. But you've reminded me that the quiet, thoughtful acts, the ones done without expectation of reward, are what truly define character. You've shown me something I will never forget." Ella's lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. She felt a mixture of pride, humility, and a gentle warmth that she had rarely experienced before. She had done her work for years, quietly and carefully, without ever thinking it would be noticed in this way. And now, for the first time, she felt truly understood. Jacob took a deep breath, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't often say these things," he admitted, "but I want you to know that your presence here, it makes a difference. Not because of orders or instructions, but because of who you are, and that is something I cannot ignore." Ella's hands relaxed, the cloth she had been holding now resting lightly by her side. She felt a sense of relief and quiet joy. For the first time, she realized that being thoughtful and kind, even in silence, had value. She had never sought recognition, but this acknowledgement, genuine and heartfelt, filled her with warmth. Jacob smiled again, a quiet, satisfied expression. "Thank you, Ella," he said simply, "for everything, for tonight, for your work, and for the way you care. You've reminded me of something important. That character is revealed in the smallest details, in the acts done without expectation, in the kindness shown quietly and consistently." Ella nodded, feeling a connection that went beyond words. She had always thought of her actions as ordinary, her care as simple. But now she understood that what she did mattered, and that her quiet strength had left an impact. For the rest of the evening, the two of them sat together in the lounge. Jacob did not ask for more work or demand attention. He simply allowed the silence to speak, filled with mutual respect and understanding. The fire flickered softly, the room warm and peaceful, and the stars shone quietly outside the window. In that calm and gentle night, Jacob Whitman realized that wealth, status, or authority could never replace the kind of care, thoughtfulness, and quiet kindness that Ella possessed. She had taught him a lesson without words, through simple, instinctive actions, and he would carry that lesson with him always. As the ranch settled fully into the night, Jacob finally allowed himself to rest. But unlike before, he did not pretend to sleep. He felt a deep sense of admiration and gratitude for the young maid whose quiet, shy nature had revealed so much about the true meaning of character and kindness. Ella had left him completely frozen, not out of fear or surprise, but out of awe at the heart and spirit of someone so genuine, so thoughtful, and so extraordinary in the simplest ways.